Good evening and welcome to this webinar that we're hosting to discuss looking forward and the high school redistricting process here in the Dublin City Schools. I'm John Marshausen. I'm the superintendent of the Dublin City Schools, and I am joined this evening by Mrs. Cassie Dietrich, our public information officer, and joining me in a little bit will be Mr. Matt Cropper with Cropper GIS, who his firm will be assisting us as they did with the elementary and middle school redistricting process. Matt will be helping us and assisting us as we go through the process here with our high schools. And thanks to Mr. Scott Gill, who is our everything tech guy when it comes to getting these webinars up and running. And we're grateful that you're able to join us and are hopeful that if you know folks who are unable to be with us this evening, they will be able to go back and look at the video and be able to learn more about the process. As we get started, I would like everybody to know, and I've heard all kinds of different things, we haven't even started the process yet. So as we walk through tonight and as we walk through the next several months, if someone tells you they know what the maps look like, they don't, because as Matt and I will share later, we haven't done a single map yet. We haven't gone through the process yet. Our goal is to get information out to you now, to gather the information and the data over the summer, and then to start the sharing and engagement in full force in the fall. So what do we know right now? And as we look forward, where are we? So Mr. Gill, if we could go to our next slide, we know that the enrollment at Dublin Jerome continues to grow. We also know that our high school students are not evenly distributed among our high schools right now. And we also know that the tax burden on our community is very high. We live in a community that is viewed by the Ohio Department of Education as a wealthy suburban district. We do not receive much state aid from the state. In fact, we receive the minimum 10% operating money from the state of Ohio. So we are over 85% funded by your local property taxes. And although we were successful in 2023 with our last levy, we know that coming back to our voters for additional money in the short term is not an option. When you look right now, our student populations are almost 1,500 students at Scioto, about 1,800 students at Kaufman, and about 2,071 students at Dublin Jerome. We also know that Jerome population is going to continue to grow at a much faster rate. As you can see here, if we were to do nothing, when we get to 2033, Jerome would approach almost 3,000 students. So our options as we look to the next 5 years or so, and Mr. Gill, if we could move to the next slide. If we were to do nothing, we would get by 2030, 1,750 students at Kaufman, 27 at Jerome, and 1,700 at Dublin Scioto. So what we are planning to do is part of a multi-year process that was started really back with the levy in 2018. And that is to put additions on both Dublin Jerome. That addition was completed in 2023. And now to move and put an addition onto Scioto High School. That would have us by 2030 have about 2,000 students in each of our 3 high schools. And if we go to the next slide, we really look at why that doing nothing isn't an option. We cannot continue to just add on to Dublin Jerome High School. We know that 3 high schools with balanced student enrollment allows for opportunities to be the same at those 3 schools. And we can do this without coming back to our taxpayers for additional dollars. So we've started this process in May. At the second May board meeting, we will have our official groundbreaking over at Scioto. Fanning and Howie, a local Dublin firm, is our architect for this process. And there are already construction fences and equipment starting to arrive at Scioto to meet this challenge for us as a community of rising high school enrollment. We are a destination district, and we are incredibly proud that home builders want to continue to build houses in our Dublin community, and that this is a place that families want to come to have their children educated and to live and raise their families in the amazing Dublin community that we have today. So, for the timeline that we're looking at, and right now we're introducing the redistricting process. We will have a public information session with Cropper GIS on August 26th as we get back to school in the fall. On September 29th, at both Jerome and Kaufman High School, we will do the first reveal of the maps. And that will allow our community, very similar to what we did with the middle schools and elementaries, that will allow our community to have the first glance at what our draft maps will be for redistricting. We will have then several weeks of open feedback where the community will be able to submit through the Cropper GIS website comments about the redistricting process. We want everyone to know that we made adjustments to the comments that were made for the elementary and middle school maps. Now, not everyone gets what they asked for because a lot of the times there are competing comments. I don't want to move school districts, but I think they should. And you get the same thing from someone else. But we will take all those comments, and Matt and his team do a phenomenal job making those adjustments. The final maps will be presented to the Board of Education on November 10th at the November board meeting, and that meeting will be at Dublin Scioto High School. One of the reasons we're doing this so early in November is this will allow us to work through the process of scheduling for the next school year. We start our scheduling process in December with high school students by getting things finalized in November and having decisions made in December. That allows us to get those schedules built because the first day of school for the 26-27 school year is August 20th. And on August 20th, 2026, we'll be ready to have the addition on Scioto ready to go. We will welcome full freshman classes at all three of our high schools as we work towards reaching that balanced number in the future. Now, during this process, we will continue to have our redistricting website up and going. And Mr. Gill, if you go to the next slide, this redistricting website will be updated as information becomes available. If you hear a rumor, if you have questions, you'll be able to ask questions on this website and get answers to questions that might be floating around in our community. We had our elementary and middle school site up for some time. We will now start populating the high school redistricting side of this. You can also subscribe to DCS Today, which is our weekly update where you can get information, and you can watch our e-newsletters where we'll be able to provide more information to you as it becomes available through this redistricting process. We know that this is extremely emotional. We know that when we talk about moving attendance zones, and specifically high school attendance zones, it's something that makes some people really anxious. And there are very few people who are like, yeah, I hope it's me who gets moved. But as we've talked about balancing our three high schools, it's almost universally understood that this is the right thing to do for our district, the right thing to get these schools balanced at around 2,000, 2,100 students each. And now it's just the question of how do we get there and what movement is required to get to that point. So there are a lot of great questions. I could try to answer some of them ahead of time, but I'm going to let Mrs. Dietrich go through all of the wonderful questions that our community has submitted. And Matt and I will do our best to go through and provide those answers to you so that we can all get going on the same page. Mrs. Dietrich.
All right, so the first question is why aren't we just building a fourth high school to accommodate growth in the Northwest instead of impacting Kaufman and Scioto students? And what are the plans then for the 100 acres if we're not going to use them for a fourth high school?
At this point, when we look at where we are as a district, one, our enrollment projections beyond 2030 and 2035 don't indicate that a fourth high school is going to be necessary right now. Now, they're only projections and they get less accurate every year out. But the last thing we want to do is overbuild when it comes to high schools. One of the things that's even harder than redistricting is closing buildings than redistricting. Also, construction costs are such that we would probably be looking in the $250 million range on the low side of building a fourth high school. And that doesn't take into account all of the operating costs that are increased with a fourth high school that we don't see when we balance the high school, the enrollment among our three high schools. So right now, don't want to overbuild. This is the responsible financial thing to do. And it balances those three high schools right around 2,000 students when we get to 2030. Dublin has always done a fabulous job purchasing land ahead of when it was needed. The land that we're building Bishop Elementary on behind Jerome High School, we owned before we went to the voters to ask for the funds to build the building. The land that Hopewell Elementary is on, up on Emerald Parkway, the district owned that land for 30 years. So right now, owning that land on the corner of Industrial Parkway and Mitchell DeWitt, one, when whatever it is we need next, we're ready to go. And right now, we can't predict what that could be. It could be another middle school and another elementary because we could potentially need 6 middle schools before we would need 4 high schools. So we own it. We're ready for what's next. And that land is only increasing in value. And we didn't buy it as an investment property. But when we work with the Scott family, who worked with the district for us to purchase that land, they were very kind with the price that they gave to the school district. So we're confident that holding that land gives us options in the future. But right now, without asking you, our voters, for more money, this is the solution that the school board decided to go in.
Great. What were some alternative solutions that were explored to manage enrollment? Did you look at expanding online classes, offering more academic classes at Tolles or Emerald Campus, something other than having to redistrict our high schools?
Yeah, if you were reading the newspaper and watching what we were doing last year about this time, we were exploring the Cardinal Health Building because what we're seeing and experiencing here at Emerald Campus is we're full. There's not space for additional classes here at Emerald Campus. Our course load here fills this building. So we have been looking at other non-traditional educational options. But the other thing we heard from our community was during COVID, online classes for most students isn't the best way for them to learn, especially at the high school level. So we want our students face to face. Our community and the reason people move here is because of the amazing opportunity and experiences we provide in the Dublin City Schools. That's the foundation of that is our teachers. The foundation for that is the experiences that we're able to provide in our buildings. So we did look at other options. As I said earlier, this is something that was part of a conversation in 2018 when we explored adding on to both Scioto and Jerome. We built onto Jerome first. Now we're able to follow up with the addition on Scioto. So we're about a decade in the making. And to be honest, at some point, we just have to redistrict the high schools. It's probably something that could have happened at multiple times over the past decade, but now's the time that this addition is financially responsible. We're to the point where we can see what balanced looks like. and we don't have to come back and ask for additional resources.
All right, so knowing that that's where we're headed, what are the top 2 to 3 priorities for the district that are guiding the high school process?
Well, our internal planning team hasn't met yet, but from John Marshausen's perspective, when we look at what are the top 2 or 3 priorities that when I talk with Mr. Cropper, I'm going to say this is what I think we need. Number one, we don't want to have to do this again in the near future. When we look at our numbers, 3 high schools should serve us if projections are in the ballpark through 2035 or later. So the number one concern right now as we enter this process is we want a solution that we don't have to undo or change again for at least a decade. And if that means a little additional movement now, because we see where the growth is coming, we need to bite the bullet and make those decisions now so that in 4, 5, or 6 years, we're not back having to do spot redistricting again. So the number one priority is based on the best information we have this summer, what is the redistricting plan that gets us to 2034, 2035, 2036? Those are our like first graders. So as we look at what that plan is, that would be the number one thing that we're looking at. Number two, as we look at this, how do we get as close to balanced as we can, both in 2030, then in 2035? We look at opportunities, we look at course offerings, we look at extracurriculars. The more balanced we can be, the better off that we're going to be as a district. And then finally, and this is something that we're going to work with some experts on, we're going to do some traffic studies. What is the time to get to these places now? When you look at crossing the Scioto River and you take the O'Shaughnessy Reservoir into account, you take Emerald Parkway, you take going through historic Dublin. When you look at folks crossing the river, what's the time at different times of the day, and what do we think future growth is going to do to those processes? And we want you, our community, to know it's not us listening to conjecture or stories or watching out the window. We want to have experts give us this data. Megan O'Callahan and our partners at the city have been great, recommending some folks who do those traffic studies. I know the city has worked on those a lot. So as we go through this process, we want to have that information right at hand as we work through this.
So we know there's a hierarchy of, or there's listed factors that Cropper will consider in terms of his priorities. What is the hierarchy of those listed factors? So enrollment, growth, transportation, feeder patterns, proximity, fiscal accountability. Which one comes first?
I think you've got to be able to balance them all. As I said, if I'm the only one making those recommendations, and we'll have a whole committee of people making those recommendations, my first priority is longevity of the balanced enrollment. Would be the first thing that I think we need to consider, because we know the stress and anxiety this causes. We also know as educators that the kids are going to be fine once they get settled into their new high schools. So the least amount of times you have to do this, the better off we're going to be. So in my mind, that's number one. All of the other components that Cropper takes into account, they're going to be balanced and weighed pretty similarly when it comes to the weight that goes into how do those decisions come together.
All right. Will redistricting only affect Jerome students, or could Kaufman students also be reassigned?
I think everything's on the table. I think as we look at how do we redraw these boundaries so that they're sustainable for the next decade, and so that we're able to reach that desired balance with the classes of 29 and the class of 30, as we get to that point, it's all there. So it's not just one school that could be affected. Yes, there could be Kaufman students that go to Scioto because Jerome students go to Kaufman. There could be some Jerome students who go to Scioto. Um, what I don't see, and we're not holding Matt to this like in a tight box, but what I really don't see is Scioto kids leaving Scioto. As we look to balance this out, um, that's probably not a high likelihood. Are we saying never? No, we're not saying never. But if the goal is to get more kids over there, moving kids out of there probably is counterintuitive to the process. Although he's a lot smarter than I am. So if he comes up with something when it comes to redistricting, we'll of course listen to what Matt has to say.
We will for sure. Um, at what grade levels is redistricting most needed?
Well, we're looking at high school. And one of the things that we're fortunate in doing is, and this is a tribute to Mr. Stark and our operations team, by getting this open in the fall of 26, we're going to be able to allow, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more later, we're going to be able to allow students who are ready start high school to stay in the high school that they're in. So we're not at a crunch point where we're saying we're so overcrowded at Jerome, everybody's got to move in the fall of 26. We're going to be able to let students who will be sophomores, which is the class of 29, and juniors, the class of 28, and will be seniors, that class of 27, will be able to allow them to have the option at the high school and remain at the high school that they start. So those students will have two options. They can stay in the high school that they started attending and that they attended in the 25-26 school year, or they can move to the new high school if their residence moves for the 26-27 school year. That's because we're early enough that we have some flexibility. As our current fifth, sixth, seventh graders get up there, we won't have that flexibility. So I think we see the bubble coming. And as there are new houses built, most of the people who are moving into those new houses aren't high school kids. Most of the people moving into those new houses have elementary and middle school kids. So a little flexibility now allows us the option to give to our students and their families as they start high school.
You just knew that was the next question, didn't you?
No, but it's one of the most frequently asked questions we get. And I sometimes use the term rising sophomores, juniors, and seniors. That's probably for more of an athletic background because that's how you talk about kids during the summer before they start. But I guess it's important. We need to talk more about the classes of 27, 28, and 29.
Mm-hmm.
That's our current eighth graders. If you're in eighth grade now and you start high school next year, you'll have the option to stay where you start. That will allow us that flexibility, and it allows you that flexibility. You'll have a one-time choice if your home is redistricted to another area. You can stay or you can go to your new attendance area, and after that, we'll just get going. So when we talk about this, we're really looking at future students when we get to that 29-30 school year.
And what about their siblings? So what if I have a fifth grader and an eighth grader?
We're not going to be able to grandfather. So if you have a fifth grader and eighth grader, and your eighth grader next year is a ninth grader at Jerome, and your home were to get redistricted, you'll have the choice as a family. There would be potential you could have students in two high schools at some point, or you can move the older student to the high school in your attendance area where the younger sibling will then follow.
And will transportation be provided for those who stay at their current high school?
No, if you choose to stay at your current high school, you'll have to get there. One of our biggest employment crises that we face right now is bus drivers. And it's not a Dublin thing, it's an everybody thing. So the cost to double route high schools isn't practical. So that'll be something that families will have to work out. We can tell from looking at our parking lots, most of our juniors and seniors can find a way to get there. So that will be a family decision, and I'm sure we'll weigh into the decision-making process.
I know you talked about the traffic study. Are there any other additional studies that are being conducted to help us make boundary decisions?
We, in addition to doing our enrollment projections, which we've used Wolpert for years to do, for those of you who have followed this for a while, Wolpert used to be cooperative strategies. New company purchased them. So when you hear Wolpert, it's the old cooperative strategies. Wolpert has also done a housing study for us where they've looked at available green space. They've looked at some of the things the city of Columbus is doing, and they're projecting where and what types of housing can go into space. One of the things that allows us in Dublin to rest a little easier than, say, our neighbors to the north in Olentangy, we do run out of green space at some point. When we get into the early 2030s, mid 2030s, the available land in Dublin, it's all built up. So we do see a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to housing growth. But we still got a little bit of way. So that housing study is another layer that will allow us to give Cropper GIS some additional data. And again, none of this is airtight. They're projections, and they use scientific formulas and equations to try to project these things. But some of you have heard me say this before. If a decade ago you had asked me, would Andersons ever be apartments? I would say no, but it is. If someone had talked about the athletic club at Sawmill being apartments, you would have been like, no way, that place is busy. So we're projecting based on what we know today. It's easier for us to project in the city of Dublin because the city of Dublin's pretty consistent with how it does its work. And we as a school district are brought in early in the process with the city of Dublin. So as the city of Dublin's going through a revitalization planning, visioning process over at Metro Park, we've had school board members meeting with council members, and they've given us updates, and we know what kind of housing units, and there's a trust and confidence in our collaboration with the city of Dublin. We don't always get that with the outlying areas that we work with or with the city of Columbus, with what they're doing. So we look at the best information we have and make the best decisions that we can at each time.
Great. I know you talked about the traffic study. As part of that, have they looked at the impact of busing and student drivers on congested bridges like Glick and Emerald Parkway? And then have they also looked at teenagers driving on Riverside Drive and safety?
Yeah, those are all things that the traffic study, which hasn't happened yet, will be looking at. And there are things that, we want hard data. It's easy to say that light that's in front of where the Bogey Inn was just gums up Shawnee Hills if you're trying to get across Glick at the O'Shaughnessy Reservoir. We kind of want to know the data, the time. What does gummed up mean? Those of us who try to go across it sometimes are like, what is going on when you're backed up in the intersection at Wendy's or when you're stuck trying to get from the zoo area back? So all of that we do want to look at. We also want to look at, and I know there have been some speed studies and trying to slow down people on Riverside there. So those are all things that have to be taken into consideration when you look at any amount of redistricting and who's got to go where.
Will middle schools continue to split into no more than 2 high schools so that middle schoolers can stay together as much as possible?
Without knowing what the internal planning team is going to tell Mr. Cropper, my hope is that the internal planning team, as we come together, will tell Cropper GIS, we don't want any middle school split more than twice. So that would be my intention as we move is to not split middle schools more than twice.
And when we talk about neighborhoods and proximity, will you keep neighborhoods such as Fields and Tartan Ridge together within high school boundaries?
We will do our best to keep neighborhoods together. One of the things we found in the past, Jerome Village is neighborhoods within neighborhoods. So you can't say you're going to leave Jerome Village together, just as we couldn't leave Jerome Village together for elementary or middle school, because there are neighborhoods within some of the bigger neighborhoods. We will do our best to leave subdivisions together. And if they're not kept together, there'll be clean places where there are breaks.
All right, I think the next one might be better for Mr. Cropper. So how is proximity to current schools considered? And how do you take into consideration like crossing US 33 or I-270 near Kaufman when you're looking at those major landmarks?
Well, I'd say that proximity is certainly a factor that needs to be taken into consideration, and it always is when we do this kind of work across the country. With our technology and the data that we have, and just ongoing review of options as we develop them, we always look at students, where they live and where they're going to school or where they may go to school. I often look at, well, the traffic study is going to be a very useful piece of information to help inform us. But I also like to go in and just look on Google Maps at certain points in time from areas from one point to the school to see not only what the distance is in terms of students to get to school, but what is the time and congestion with roads and things like that. So proximity is definitely a factor that we will be looking at, in addition to all of the other factors that Dr. Marshausen mentioned: balancing utilization, looking at feeder pattern splits, how much of a school is split in different options, and utilization of the buildings. So all those factors come into play and are just as important, one versus the other. But proximity is certainly something that will be factored in and looked at when we start to evaluate options.
Great. Back to you, Dr. Marshausen. So this is a family asking, if we are not bused to our current high school, are we safe from being redistricted?
Without knowing specifics, I can't commit to anyone being safe at this point. If you're not bused, you're probably within 2 miles, a mile and a half. So, I don't think there's a high likelihood, but I can see Matt's face now, and I couldn't see it when I was saying things before. So, Matt, would you say, like, if you're within a mile of your high school and you're within a walking zone? Probably not, but I'm not promising. You're muted there, sir.
You're muted.
I always basically say, like you said, we don't know. We haven't looked at the data. At this point, it's best to not speculate. And of course, if students can walk to school or they're within that close proximity, we certainly want to maintain that ability. But the best plan is one that best adheres to all of our objectives and criteria. And it's just something that we will certainly be mindful of. But I think it's good to understand that any student in this process could be impacted, although we're going to do our best to minimize the number of students that are moved.
Dr. Marshausen, why aren't we just adjusting the boundaries for new families moving into the district so that we can minimize disruption for current students?
Well, I think when we look long term, those adjustments would be something that were short term. And to have neighborhoods split and to have this group of new houses going to one school and the group across the street or in an adjacent neighborhood going someplace else. One, it is incredibly inefficient when it comes to transportation. Two, it's not best for kids in the long run. So as we look at this and we look at the disruption to students, we're allowing all students to stay at the high school that they start if they choose. And we're allowing students to stay if we don't split middle schools more than twice. They're staying with students that they were in middle school with already. And then when that new family moves in, I want you to think if it were you, to say that here's a new house. This house has to go to a different school, unlike everyone else in this neighborhood. It's about the kids. So what we're doing here by giving this runway, by allowing the flexibility of students to stay, is minimally disruptive for those students. And as we think about that freshman class that first goes into their new attendance zones, they're with kids they were in middle school with. So I think this is the least disruptive way to do this that provides the most stability for the district long term.
Will the overall boundary of the district be changing at all as we go through this process?
No, our external boundaries are our external boundaries. For those of you who have been part of these conversations for a decade or more, the win-win agreement was dissolved. So our school boundaries are our school district boundaries. And I know they all don't make sense. If you look at a map and you're like, why does that do that? Historically, as townships, school districts combined and merged, those were farm lines. So if you look along the northern part around 42 and through there, whose farm was on which side of the road was which school district they ended up going in. And our district is our district. So that's stable right now.
How will socioeconomic balance be considered to avoid perpetuating the wrong side of the river stigma at Scioto?
Well, I think socioeconomics are one of the criteria that we look at, but we also, by balancing these enrollments, one of the challenges that we faced at Scioto is simply that it's smaller. When you look at the fact that they're Division II in some sports, because they just don't have as many kids. As we balance our enrollment across the three schools, I think we'll naturally shift some of that stigma. And we have to keep in mind, it's just a stigma. When you look at how our three schools perform compared to other Central Ohio and Ohio schools, we have three amazing high schools. And when you look at the offerings, we offer the same courses at all of the high schools. And in some cases, because Scioto might be a little smaller, maybe they only have 4 AP Calc classes, while Jerome might have 9 AP Calc. Part of that's just a function of size. So I think as we go through this and as we get this enrollment balance, that stigma is going to take care of itself. And we will continue to have 3 amazing high schools in the Dublin City Schools.
How is Title I funding determined, and why are schools like Sells and Scioto not receiving Title I resources despite high percentages of economically disadvantaged students?
Well, as a district, we receive those title funds. All of our students receive the services that the student needs to receive. While we may focus the title funds at specific elementary buildings, that's just where the allocation goes. Our title money is our title money. And at Davis and Sells and Scioto, at any building across our district, if a child has needs, their needs are met by our team. If a child has a 504, if a child needs EL services, if a child's on an IEP, extra tutoring, RTI plan, all of those services are provided regardless if it's a title building or not. So we may put that label on some buildings, but it's really important for us as a district to know the services follow the child wherever they are in our district. And our goal across the board, regardless of socioeconomics, regardless of nation of origin, regardless of native language, we serve every student where they are by giving them the services they need.
Will potential imbalances in the EL, like English learner populations between Kaufman and Scioto, be considered in redistricting plans?
No. Do you want a little bit more than that?
Yeah, can you
Uh,
expand on that? Like,
Well,
why do we not
well,
focus
I
on?
think part of it is as a school district, and Matt helped us with this on the first redistricting. Our core for elementaries is neighborhood elementaries. Our goal is to keep neighborhoods together for their elementary schools as close to where they live as possible. And that proximity and that sense of neighborhood, and in the Dublin City School District, yeah, it would be more efficient if we built 1,500 student elementaries. But for us, that sweet spot is in that 600 to 800 student mark, because we know with smaller neighborhood elementaries, principals get to know their kids, teachers get to know their kids. A 3, 4, or 5 sections of students going through elementary together creates a bond. When you get those neighborhood elementaries and then you try to decide who goes to which of our 5 middle schools, we agonized with Cropper GIS on how do we get those elementaries to the middle schools, and can we keep them together using some of the same criteria we just talked about. One of the solutions at middle school was to keep Indian Run at Cells because they're all right there and they're together. And it makes sense for Indian Run just to go to Cells together. As we play this out, neighborhood elementaries, try to keep them together, proximity to middle schools. Now you go to middle schools. We don't want to break middle schools more than twice. So now it's middle schools to high schools. So the foundation of how we do this starts with those neighborhood elementaries. And if you were to ever have the opportunity, like I get to do every once in a while, if you walk to Riverside Elementary on a fall or a spring morning at a building that doesn't have any buses, because everybody at Riverside can walk to Riverside, the sense of community is amazing. If you go to Old Sawmill in Davis and you see the same thing, if you're up at Carr and you see all the bikes that get rode to Carr by the kids, none of them lock. They're just 600 bikes sitting outside on a Sunday morning, on a sunny morning. Like that sense of neighborhood so important. So no, we're not talking about bussing kids around to achieve anything different. We're talking about proximity, numbers, and getting kids to stay together as much as possible.
So our buildings won't all look alike. Is that what I hear you saying? They're not cookie
Yeah, they're
cutter.
not good. They're not. We couldn't make them look all alike if we wanted to. Dublin is one of the most diverse districts in the state of Ohio. We're 40% when we look at our different amount of students from different heritages and backgrounds. We've got 100 different languages. No, we're about as diverse as they come in terms of school districts, and it makes us stronger. And we embrace that and lean into that. And as I said earlier, we meet every kid where they are. So no, our buildings, they can't look all the same. And that's not where we're going. Matt, am I missing anything here? You do this across the country.
No, I think you're spot on. That's, you do what you can to make sure that if at all possible, that the schools resemble the overall composition of the district as a whole. Ideally, that would be ideal, but there are certain factors you have to account for: where students live, where communities reside in different parts of the district, and focusing on all those other parts and pieces of the criteria that we look at. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely good to enable as much of that as possible, so that schools are very similar as they can be. But it has to be done with light of the other factors that we're working with.
All right. Dr. Marshausen, when we get to November, how and when will students indicate which high school they will attend? What will that process look like?
Well, once we have the final maps that will be available and the final district boundary, high school district boundaries are presented, I think it was November 10th. at a board meeting. There'll be about 3 or 4 weeks where students and families will be contacted if their attendance zone is changing. And there'll be a process. It'll be a form that they have to fill out that will allow them to choose, I'm going to stay at the high school that I'm currently attending, or I'm going to move to the high school that's in the new attendance boundary. That then will trigger the counselors helping with the scheduling process for the following school year. So lots of conversations, lots of work with counselors, opportunities for students and parents to connect with their high school counselors, to talk about what's going to be best for each child. You know, we are one of the largest districts in the state of Ohio, but we pride ourselves in being able to have those conversations at the building levels that allow that personalization and that customization of the learning experience.
All right, Cropper, I'm gonna bounce this one to you. How do you account for the number of students who will indicate they're going to remain at their current high school when you're calculating enrollment projections and looking at numbers?
That's a great question. In doing this work on a day-to-day basis, we always deal with districts having the policies or the offerings like Dr. Marshausen has talked about, where students are able to remain at their school until they finish out. I will say that most commonly it's the rising seniors or the upcoming seniors and upcoming juniors. And I would say that what the district is offering for students, to any student who's in the school, to remain is very is very good for the district and a good offering for the community members. I think it's a good measure to further reduce the impact on students and families that may be impacted in this. But with that said, it's important for us to focus on what our enrollment is estimated to be when everything is said and done, and once all the students are in their buildings and all of the transitioning has come to fruition, and students grandfathering or continuing or not. We look at the end game first, and that's really kind of what we focus on. And then determining how you get there is a matter of trying to get an assessment of how many students may stay or go. Really, we see that as a temporary phase or period as the communities transition to a new building and work through the whole redistricting plan. Typically, we've seen about 20 to 30% of students opt to stay at their home school that were impacted, and the remainder of students typically choose the option to go to the school where they're moved to for whatever reason it may be, transportation, friends are all going with friends, and those types of things. So we'll keep an eye on what our end game is, what our target enrollments are going to be, accounting for projected enrollment and growth potential, and that's really the biggest part to focus on. And then figuring out how you get there is just really comes along for the ride, ensuring that students have the opportunities that they have to stay at one place or another, knowing that there's going to be some fluctuations until you get to that final enrollment with all students going to school they're supposed to be at.
Yeah, and Dr. Marshausen, on that note, can you talk about how that first year at Scioto, it won't be full because of the way that will work?
Yeah, and part of this also works out pretty well for us because of where the growth's happening in the district. And Matt will take this all into account. That first year, the addition at Scioto is not going to be full. We anticipate the only full class at Scioto when it opens in 26-27 will be the freshman class. The sophomores, juniors, and seniors probably progressively as you get closer to senior year will be a certain percentage away from being everybody who was redistricted to be there. But as students kind of shift during this process, we're also seeing larger classes come back up and fill at Jerome. So that's part of the conversation, and part of Matt's genius in the programs that he uses is, as you look at, we know where that growth is coming. How do we get enough students out of that attendance pattern over that 3-year transition and then into the future to backfill that, while the others, once they get to that 29-30 year, are going to be relatively stable. So that's what we will challenge Cropper GIS to do, is understanding that in that 3-year phase-in plan, certain percentages of kids are going to be at certain places, and we've got space for that now. And as Matt said, it's really, where do we look like we're going to be in 2030, 2031? That for us is that sweet spot of numbers being where we need them to be. When we talk about this, we're really talking future students. The class of 2031, 2032, 2033, there are 6th, 5th, and 4th graders now. So that's where we're looking. Where will they all be when we get there, to hopefully be around 2,100 students at each high school?
And you shared the timeline at the beginning. Is it possible for these boundaries to be available sooner so people can transfer to their high school this summer? Like, why the timeline shift to later in the year?
Well, we heard directly from many of our engagement groups, and Cassie, you were part of these conversations, where people said, don't do stuff during the summer. And some of it was, it's not fair. We have vacation plans. We're not tuned in. And so as we talk to folks in our community, one of the main reasons for this kind of move was, we didn't want this to be part of people's summer. If they're on a beach, if they're in the hills, if they're visiting family, it's summer. The second part was, we were pretty successful with our timeline for elementary and middle school. When we did early fall, people were very engaged. As people come back in the fall, there's an energy, there's a connectedness as you start a school year. So those two things coming together, the disconnectedness of summer, and then the natural, everybody's tuned in when the school year starts, led us to, let's replicate the process. We did it once. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Also, Cassie, and I'll just throw this out there,
Yeah.
the district policy for requesting intra-district open enrollment has to be turned in by May 1st. So we'd never hit that policy anyway, because there's no way we were going to have this done by May 1st. And we are steadfast to our policies when it comes to intra-district open enrollment. So
I think Cropper's good. I don't know if he's May 1st good.
No, he's not May 1st good.
Speaking of intra-district transfer, will transfer options change in 26, 27 to allow students to request placement outside their assigned school once they're redistricted?
No, and in fact, to ensure stability and consistency, we just updated and the board approved a new policy, or an addendum to the policy, that said if a school is part of a redistricting process, there will be no intra-district open enrollment for 3 years after the redistricting process. So really, in Dublin, where we want to get is, you go to school where you live. The district sets attendance boundaries, you go to school in your attendance boundaries. We're too big to make exceptions. We're too big to start, and we're growing too fast to start letting people move around. The work that Matt is doing for us is allowing us to take into account enrollment projections, housing projections, all of those things. And although every person who requests to move someplace else does so because they're like, it's only me, my situation's different than everybody else's, but there are hundreds of people who feel it's only me and my situation's different than everybody else's. So I think Dr. Schwanke and I probably weekly have to let people know, we don't make exceptions. You go to school where your attendance boundary is. And as we finish this process for high school, it'll be frozen for 3 years per board policy. Once we get to 26, 27, nobody's going to any other high schools other than the ones that are in their attendance zone.
And I know you mentioned this earlier, but we'll just revisit it. How long do you think these new boundaries will last before another redistricting may be needed?
Again, minus a crystal ball. And if the data we had, we knew was going to be good for the next 15 years, Cropper GIS could set us up for 15 years. Knowing that no data is airtight, I want to be confident until 2035. That's my goal, is to leave this process when we open 26, 27 and be confident that we're going to get a decade out of it. Mr. Cropper, is that feasible if things are in the ballpark?
If things are in the ballpark, yes. You know, there's in areas that are rapidly changing and evolving, like Dublin is. It's sometimes hard to achieve that, but certainly we want these to hold for as long as possible. And I think with good data, like you alluded to, and good proper planning, I think we can maximize the use of these boundaries the best that we can, and hopefully they can hold 10 years. But if something happens unanticipated and there is a need down the road, I think it'll probably be understood as to why that may be necessary. But yeah, I think it's good to try to strive for a 10-year window for especially high school boundaries in a district like this.
All right, and then this one might be a little bit for both of you as well. How can the community provide input, and how much input is considered once it's provided?
We're going to have those public meetings. We continue to take frequently asked questions. And when the first maps are released in September, Cropper took every comment into consideration and went through them all. And Matt, you want to talk about how you do that?
Absolutely. We study them every day. It's part of our routine, is to see what comments have been submitted, how many are there any new themes, new concepts. When we kick this process off in August, we are going to open up a general feedback form where people can provide input at even before maps are being shown or considered. And so your input as members of the public is critical in this process. And like Dr. Marshausen said, comments that were received for the last year's process for elementaries and middle schools were very helpful. And not only comments on the feedback form, but conversations around the maps at the public meetings and things like that. We are listening, and we do care about what you say. And I always say that it's really a comment that brings us closer to achieving our objectives is the most important comment. Sometimes one comment from a person will necessitate a move or could drive a change to a map, where we may get 200 comments from a community that has that wants to stay or some petitioning to stay, where doing so may bring us further. It may bring us further away from aligning with our objectives. We may not be able to do what the popular majority may want, but we could potentially make a change to from what one person says. Not to say that a couple hundred people saying a comment that brings us closer to our objectives won't be considered or adhered to, but every comment is equally as important as we evaluate and study input that's being provided.
That's it. That's all the questions I had for this evening. So I think we are good.
Matt, I look forward to doing this again. So, we did it once. Let's rewind, and we'll get high school done here over the next 8 months or so, and working together and working with our community, set us on a path for being able to do something that has been much needed in our community for the last several years. So we look forward to working with you and the partnership. Cassie, thank you for playing host for us this evening. We appreciate the questions, and to the 100 or so of you who joined us and the others who may watch this later, we appreciate you taking your time to get more educated about an incredibly important journey that we're going to be on together in Dublin. Matt, any last words?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to work with the public on this important process, and thank you for the opportunity. And look forward to seeing you all here in a few months.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to continuing this process and this conversation in the future.